and then along came Tet. The worst year of the war was 1968. Tet was the uprising, the offensive of the Vietnamese resistance to the United States in late January, early February 1968. Massive attack all across South Vietnam. It put the lie to what the administration had said about how we're winning this war. And it was the worst period for the American military. At one point, there were as many as 500 American soldiers dying every week in combat in Vietnam during this period right after Tet in the first half of '68. So it was the worst period, and it really brought forward to all of us the lie that we had been told, and we saw the experience. So the GI movement really took off in '68 in the Army and the Marine Corps in particular. And then later on in '69 and '70, when the government shifted to an intensified air war, then we saw growing resistance in the Navy and in the Air Force. So from the period '68 to '72, there was a very widespread opposition movement in the military, in bases all over the world, in ships and aircraft carriers. It was really a very widespread phenomenon.
David Courtwright, the significance of what's happening today, Winter Soldier 2, I guess you could say.
We're seeing a similar experience. The soldiers and veterans who've been there to Iraq and Afghanistan can see the lie of what we've been told. They're starting to speak out. They're acting again as the conscience of our nation, trying to alert our citizens that this war, these wars, are wrong, and that we need a different policy. We have to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan. And more fundamentally, we need to end this whole imperial war system that we have in America. We thought we had learned the lesson 35 years ago about Vietnam, but our leaders have dragged us again into another series of unjust, illegal wars, and the veterans are saying we have to stop this way of doing business.
David Courtwright, thanks for joining us now. Professor of Peace Studies at University of Notre Dame, Vietnam-era soldier, author of the landmark book Soldiers in Revolt, GI Resistance During the Vietnam War. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We're going to go to Congressman Kucinich to get the latest on the secret congressional session that was held last night for the 6th time in history. But first, we're going to go back to the first Winter Soldier.
Calling in of artillery for games, the way it was worked would be the mortar forward observers would call in, or we'd pick out certain houses in villages, friendly villages. And the mortar forward observers would call in mortars until they destroyed that house. And then the artillery forward observer would call in artillery until he destroyed another house. And whoever used the least amount of artillery, they won. And then when we got back, someone would have to buy someone else beers. And I saw one case where there were 2 prisoners, and one prisoner was staked out on the ground, and he was cut open while he was alive. And part of his insides were cutting out. And they told the other prisoner if he didn't tell them what they wanted to know, that they would kill him. And I don't know what he said because he spoke in Vietnamese, but then they killed him after that anyway.
Were these primarily civilians, or do you believe that they were, or do you know that they were actual...
The way that we distinguish between civilians and VC, VC had weapons and civilians didn't, and anybody that was dead was considered a VC. If you killed someone, they said, how do you know he's a VC? The general reply would be, he's dead, and that was sufficient. The cutting off of heads on Operation Stone, there was a lieutenant colonel there, and 2 people had their heads cut off and put on stakes and stuck in the middle of the field. And we were notified that there were press covering the operation and that we couldn't do that anymore. I saw one case where a woman was shot by a sniper, one of our snipers. And when we got up to her, she was asking for water. And the lieutenant said to kill her. So they ripped off her clothes, they stabbed her in both breasts, they spread her eagle and shoved an E-tool up her vagina, an entrenching tool, and she was still asking for water. And then they took that out and they used a tree limb, and then she was shot.
Did the men in the in your outfit, or did they seem to think that it was all right to do anything to the Vietnamese?
It wasn't like they were humans. Like we were, we were conditioned to believe that, this was for the good of the nation, the good of our country, and anything we did was okay. And like when you shot someone, you didn't think you were shooting a human. They were a gook or a commie, and it was okay.
An excerpt of the hearing from February 1971 in Detroit, Winter Soldier, where hundreds of soldiers gathered. At that time, it was Vietnam, talking about atrocities they themselves had engaged in Vietnam. We today are in Silver Spring, Maryland for Winter Soldier, for the testimony, for the accounts of Iraq and Afghanistan, soldiers and veterans who've come to talk about their own experiences. Congressman Dennis Kucinich joins us right now, though. The Ohio Congressmember, former presidential candidate, has just come from Washington, where he refused last night to attend a secret session of Congress. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you, Amy. I also, yesterday on the floor of the House, spoke in support of the Winter Soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan, and what they're doing, I think, is so important here in Silver Spring.
Well, talk about what happened. Only the 6th time in history did Congress, in a sense, go dark. C-SPAN went black, the screen.
Right. Well, one of the Republican leaders said that he had some secret information that he had to communicate with the rest of Congress, and so he asked the Congress to go into secret session. I went to the floor of the House in that preliminary session and pointed out that this hasn't happened but 5 times in 182 years. And I said that there should be a very high bar that has to be passed before we go into secret session. As soon as I said that, the member of Congress who asked for it started to backpedal a little bit. It'll be interesting to see what kind of gravity came out of that meeting. My guess is that it had more to do with the desire of the administration to try to push for the passage of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act than it had to do with any compelling new information about national security.
The president and the Republicans wanting to push through legislation that would grant immunity to the telecom companies for spying on Americans?
Well, that's part of it, of course. But I'm thinking that yesterday there really was an attempt to try to basically use the procedure of a secret meeting to ratchet up the pressure to pass FISA, and by essentially the Democrats called the bluff of the Republicans. And we'll see if anything was produced in that meeting, because actually at any time Congress can vote to release the transcripts and make them public. And if that happens and it wasn't a serious enough matter, there could be really extreme political repercussions, because we shouldn't be going in this secret session. I mean, there's a reason why you don't. You have a House of Representatives, the people's house. Transparency, it's essential for a democracy. It's very dangerous to have these
Explain how it works. 7:30, they sweep the Congress, all the members, to make sure you have no wires on you.
Right. Well, everyone asked. You know, now I haven't been in one of these for years. I do not sign the pledge of, quote, confidentiality, unquote, because what you essentially do is you give up your conscience. And when you go into these meetings, if something's being told that's a lie, you can't go outside and say they lied to you. But I will tell you this, Amy, that in the times that I went to these, when I was an early member of Congress, I'd go to these sessions, and, you know, they were lying to members, and so then you would be told this information. They try to propagandize the members. You can't go outside and talk about it because you'd be violating the confidentiality. I just stopped going to them because I realized that they were attempt to try to spin the members of Congress under the pretext of a national security secret. Now, I think democracy functions much better in sunlight than in the dark.
Well, Congressman Kucinich, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. We're spending the hour with soldiers, with veterans who've come here to the National Labor College to talk about their own experiences. Again, this against the backdrop, the surprise last night of the secret session.
Well, you know, they're telling their stories about a war that's based on lies, and the war that was concocted in secret.
Can I ask you a quick question? In this presidential year, you were a presidential candidate, big debate over Michigan and Florida. Your name, together with Hillary Clinton's name, was on the Michigan ballot. What is your take on what should happen there, and why Barack Obama, John Edwards did not have their name on the ballots then, and what should happen now?
Well, you know, I basically, you know, ignored the directive of the party leaders.
And so did Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, right. And so I think, you know, this is something that's going to have to be worked out. I mean, the Democratic Party is going through a very dangerous period right now. Keeping that party together so it can be competitive in November is going to be a great challenge. And so both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have a lot of work to do.
Are you going to endorse someone?
You know, I reserve the right to do that. I haven't made any decision yet.